The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall glass windows of First National Bank as a young entrepreneur adjusted his tie one last time. He had spent countless nights perfecting his business plan, triple-checking his financial projections, and rehearsing his pitch until his roommate could recite it word for word. His tech solutions company wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a growing reality with real clients and real potential. Walking into that bank felt different than the small office space he'd started in just 2 years ago. The marble floors echoed with each step, and the air smelled like fresh coffee and expensive furniture polish. He'd chosen his best suit for this meeting, the one he'd bought when he landed his first major client. The folder in his hands held more than just papers. It held proof of his success and his vision for the future. "Your credit score looks decent," the loan officer said, barely looking up from his computer screen. The words hung in the air like an afterthought. The entrepreneur watched as his carefully prepared documents sat untouched on the desk, the glossy cover page reflecting the overhead lights. He had brought everything: 3 years of tax returns, current contracts worth $500,000, and projections backed by real market research. But the questions that followed weren't about his business model or his impressive client retention rate. Instead, the loan officer seemed more interested in his personal history. "And where exactly did you get your startup capital?" the officer asked, his tone suggesting there must be some catch. "How long has your family been in this country?" Another question that had nothing to do with the $50,000 business expansion loan he was seeking. The entrepreneur kept his composure, though his hand tightened slightly on the arm of his chair. He explained again about his early contracts, about bootstrapping his way up from a one-person operation to a team of 5. He talked about the growing market for his tech solutions, about the clients waiting for him to expand his services. His voice remained steady, professional, even as he noticed the loan officer's eyes drifting to check emails during his explanation. "Look," the loan officer finally said, closing his laptop with a soft click, "your business is probably too young for what you're asking. Maybe try again in a few years." The dismissal was polite but firm, wrapped in corporate speak that couldn't quite hide its true meaning. The entrepreneur had heard this tone before. It was the sound of doors closing before they'd ever really opened. Standing up, he gathered his untouched business plan and supporting documents. His shoulders were straight, his expression neutral, but his mind was already racing ahead. This wasn't the first obstacle he'd faced, and something told him it wouldn't be the last. As he walked back through the lobby, past the friendly security guard who had wished him luck on his way in, he noticed another business owner being warmly greeted by the same loan officer who had just dismissed him. The sun was higher now as he stepped outside, its warmth touching his face. He loosened his tie slightly and took a deep breath. The rejection stung, but there was something else brewing inside him, a mixture of determination and insight. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number of a successful business owner who had mentored him in the past. This wasn't the end of his story. Something told him it was just the beginning. In his car, before starting the engine, he looked back at the bank's impressive facade. One day, he thought, they would remember this meeting very differently. He didn't know yet exactly how, but he knew one thing for certain. This rejection would turn into one of the most expensive mistakes this bank had ever made. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall glass windows of First National Bank as a young entrepreneur adjusted his tie one last time. He had spent countless nights perfecting his business plan, triple-checking his financial projections, and rehearsing his pitch until his roommate could recite it word for word. His tech solutions company wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a growing reality with real clients and real potential. Walking into that bank felt different than the small office space he'd started in just 2 years ago. The marble floors echoed with each step, and the air smelled like fresh coffee and expensive furniture polish. He'd chosen his best suit for this meeting, the one he'd bought when he landed his first major client. The folder in his hands held more than just papers. It held proof of his success and his vision for the future. Your credit score looks decent, the loan officer said, barely looking up from his computer screen. The words hung in the air like an afterthought. The entrepreneur watched as his carefully prepared documents sat untouched on the desk, the glossy cover page reflecting the overhead lights. He had brought everything: 3 years of tax returns, current contracts worth $500,000, and projections backed by real market research. But the questions that followed weren't about his business model or his impressive client retention rate. Instead, the loan officer seemed more interested in his personal history. "And where exactly did you get your startup capital?" the officer asked, his tone suggesting there must be some catch. "How long has your family been in this country?" Another question that had nothing to do with the $50,000 business expansion loan he was seeking. The entrepreneur kept his composure, though his hand tightened slightly on the arm of his chair. He explained again about his early contracts, about bootstrapping his way up from a one-person operation to a team of 5. He talked about the growing market for his tech solutions, about the clients waiting for him to expand his services. His voice remained steady, professional, even as he noticed the loan officer's eyes drifting to check emails during his explanation. "Look," the loan officer finally said, closing his laptop with a soft click, "your business is probably too young for what you're asking. Maybe try again in a few years." The dismissal was polite but firm, wrapped in corporate speak that couldn't quite hide its true meaning. The entrepreneur had heard this tone before. It was the sound of doors closing before they'd ever really opened. Standing up, he gathered his untouched business plan and supporting documents. His shoulders were straight, his expression neutral, but his mind was already racing ahead. This wasn't the first obstacle he'd faced, and something told him it wouldn't be the last. As he walked back through the lobby, past the friendly security guard who had wished him luck on his way in, he noticed another business owner being warmly greeted by the same loan officer who had just dismissed him. The sun was higher now as he stepped outside, its warmth touching his face. He loosened his tie slightly and took a deep breath. The rejection stung, but there was something else brewing inside him, a mixture of determination and insight. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number of a successful business owner who had mentored him in the past. This wasn't the end of his story. Something told him it was just the beginning. In his car, before starting the engine, he looked back at the bank's impressive facade. One day, he thought, they would remember this meeting very differently. He didn't know yet exactly how, but he knew one thing for certain. This rejection would turn into one of the most expensive mistakes this bank had ever made. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of sleepless nights and endless cups of coffee. The entrepreneur's small office became a command center, with whiteboards covering every wall and sticky notes creating a colorful mosaic of ideas. His tech team, curious about their boss's new obsession, started staying late to hear more about his vision. "Think about it," he explained one evening, standing in front of a whiteboard filled with flowcharts. "We already know how to build systems that remove human bias from decision-making. We've been doing it for our clients for years. Why not apply that to lending?" His lead developer leaned back in her chair, twirling a pen between her fingers. "But banking regulations, they're a whole different beast than what we usually handle." "Exactly why we need to crack this," he replied, circling a particular section of the flowchart. "The system isn't just unfair, it's inefficient. Banks are leaving money on the table by overlooking qualified borrowers." During the day, he kept his regular business running, meeting with clients and delivering projects. But at night, the office transformed into a think tank. His team dove deep into banking regulations, studied lending patterns, and analyzed successful fintech platforms. They ordered takeout from the local deli so often that the delivery person became part of their brainstorming sessions. The breakthrough came during one of these late-night sessions. "What if," his youngest team member said between bites of sandwich, "we don't try to replace the banks? What if we build something that helps them make better decisions?" The room fell silent. The entrepreneur walked slowly to the whiteboard, eraser in hand. Go on, he said, clearing a space for new ideas. As the night wore on, their vision took shape. They weren't just building another lending platform. They were creating a solution that could transform the entire industry. The technology would analyze business plans and financial data objectively, using advanced algorithms to assess risk without human bias. But they knew technology alone wasn't enough. The entrepreneur spent his weekends meeting with community leaders, small business owners, and even progressive bankers who recognized the need for change. Each conversation added new layers to their understanding, new features to their platform. The real power, he explained to a group of interested investors, is in the data. When you remove personal bias and look purely at business performance, you start seeing opportunities that traditional banking overlooks. His original tech solutions company became the testing ground for their new ideas. They refined their algorithms, improved their user interface, and built a system that could process lending decisions in minutes rather than weeks. The stress was immense. There were nights when doubt crept in, when the enormity of what they were trying to achieve felt overwhelming. During one particularly challenging week, his mother noticed the dark circles under his eyes during their weekly video call. "You look tired," she said, concern evident in her voice. "I am," he admitted. "But remember how you always told me that some things are bigger than ourselves. This is one of those things." His mother smiled, understanding in her eyes. She had raised him with stories of persistence, of turning obstacles into opportunities. Now she was watching him live those lessons. The project took shape faster than anyone expected. Their first prototype caught the attention of several small community banks looking to modernize their lending processes. These early partnerships provided valuable feedback and real-world testing opportunities. One evening, as he was locking up the office, he paused to look at the bank building visible from his window. The same bank that had rejected his loan now stood as a silent reminder of why he started this journey. But the bitterness of that day had transformed into something else, a quiet determination to create lasting change. His phone buzzed with a message from his mentor. "Ready to show the world what you've built." Looking at his reflection in the darkened office window, he smiled. The past few months had changed him too, turning a step back into a mission. His reply was simple: time to change the game. The seasons changed, and with them, the small tech company transformed. Their office space doubled, then tripled, taking over an entire floor of the building. The entrepreneur's vision was becoming reality, but the journey wasn't without its challenges. "Another late night?" asked the cleaning lady as she emptied the trash bins. She'd had become used to seeing the lights on well past midnight, the team huddled around computers, empty coffee cups scattered across desks. "We're close to something big," he replied, offering her a tired smile. "Just need to get these numbers right." The numbers were important. They had partnered with 3 small, community-focused banks to test their lending platform. Each partnership brought new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to improve their system. One rainy Tuesday morning, the team gathered for their weekly review. The projector displayed their latest results. Loan approval rates had increased by 40%, while default rates remained well below industry average. The data proved what they had known all along. There was a whole world of reliable borrowers being overlooked by traditional banks. "Look at this," their data analyst pointed to a graph. "Small businesses that were rejected by traditional banks but approved through our platform. 95% of them are meeting or exceeding their projected growth rates." The entrepreneur remembered his own rejection, how that one no had almost derailed his dreams. Now, his original tech solutions company was thriving, providing the steady income needed to fund their new venture. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very success the bank had doubted was now powering a revolution in lending. Building the alternative wasn't just about technology. They spent weekends at small business meetups, community centers, and local markets, talking to people about their experiences with traditional banking. Each story they heard helped refine their platform, making it more user-friendly, more accessible, more human. My grandfather ran his shop for 30 years, one small business owner told them at a community event. Perfect payment history, loyal customers, everything. But when I took over and tried to get a loan to modernize, doors slammed shut everywhere. These stories fueled their mission. The team worked tirelessly to build something different, a platform that looked at the whole picture, not just the numbers on a credit report. They incorporated alternative data points, customer reviews, supplier relationships, community involvement, and growth patterns that traditional banks often overlooked. The breakthrough came when a credit union president visited their office. She had heard about their platform through the grapevine and wanted to see it in action. "Show me," she said, settling into a chair in their conference room. For the next 2 hours, they demonstrated how their system worked, how it analyzed business plans, tracked payment histories, and assessed risk factors without human bias, how it could process applications in minutes instead of weeks, while actually making safer lending decisions. The credit union president watched in silence, taking notes. Finally, she looked up. "This isn't just a lending platform," she said. "This is a game changer." That meeting led to their biggest partnership yet. Other credit unions and community banks started calling, wanting to be part of what they were building. The team had to work around the clock to keep up with the demand. One evening, as the entrepreneur walked through the office, he paused at the wall where they displayed success stories, photos and letters from business owners who had received funding through their platform. A restaurant owner who expanded her kitchen, a mechanic who bought new diagnostic equipment, a bookstore that finally got its own delivery van. His phone buzzed with a text from his mentor. "Saw your latest numbers. You're not just building an alternative anymore, you're building the future." Looking at the success wall, he thought about how far they'd come from that day at the bank. Their platform wasn't just processing loans, it was changing lives, opening doors, and proving that success comes in many forms. As he turned off the lights that evening, a new application popped up on the system. Another entrepreneur, another dream waiting for a fair chance. He smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring another opportunity to prove that banking could be different, that it could be better, that it could be fair. The numbers were staggering. In just 12 months, their lending platform had processed over $50 million in loans to entrepreneurs who might have otherwise been turned away. But it wasn't the numbers that made the entrepreneur's heart swell with pride. It was the stories behind them. One morning, as he walked into their now bustling office, he passed the wall of success stories. It had grown so large they'd had to expand it twice. Photos, thank you letters, and newspaper clippings covered the space, each representing a dream that had found its chance to grow. "Have you seen this?" His communications director called out, waving a copy of a major financial magazine. Their platform was featured on page 3, right after the editor's letter. The article, titled "Banking's New Face," detailed how their technology was reshaping the lending landscape. But success brought its own challenges. Big investors started circling, showing up in expensive suits with even more expensive offers. Each morning seemed to bring another email from venture capital firms, each promising to help them scale faster and maximize potential. During one particularly intense meeting, a venture capitalist in a perfectly pressed suit leaned forward across the conference table. "With our backing, you could be in every major bank within a year," he said, sliding across a proposal with a number that made the entrepreneur's head spin. The entrepreneur picked up the proposal, feeling its weight in his hands. "And what happens to our mission?" he asked quietly. "What happens to the people we set out to help?" The venture capitalist's smile faltered slightly. "Business is business," he replied smoothly. "Sometimes you have to make compromises to reach the next level." That evening, the entrepreneur called an emergency team meeting. They ordered pizza and gathered in the conference room, just like in the early days. "I need your honest opinions," he said, laying out the various offers they'd received. His team listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and then one by one shared their thoughts. The consensus was clear: their independence was crucial to their mission. The next day brought unexpected visitors. A group of small business owners who'd received loans through their platform had organized a surprise thank you lunch. They transformed the office kitchen into a makeshift buffet, featuring dishes from their various restaurants and cafes. A bakery owner, her eyes bright with emotion, stood up to speak. "Last year, every bank in town told me my dream was too risky," she said, gesturing to the spread of pastries she'd brought. "Today, I have 3 employees and customers lining up down the block." Similar stories filled the room. A tech startup founder spoke about expanding his team. A food truck owner described finally buying his own truck instead of renting. A bookstore owner shared how she'd opened a second location. As the entrepreneur listened to these stories, his phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from potential investors. Each notification represented millions in potential funding, but also a potential compromise of their mission. That evening, while most of the team had gone home, he sat in his office looking out at the city lights. His mentor's words from their coffee shop conversation, so many months ago, echoed in his mind. Sometimes the best businesses are born from the problems we never wanted to face. His assistant knocked on the door, tablet in hand. "The financial reports you asked for," she said, placing them on his desk. "And you might want to see this." She pulled up a news article on her tablet. Their success was inspiring others. Small banks across the country were starting to change their lending practices. Entrepreneurs who'd been helped by their platform were creating support networks for other business owners. The impact was spreading like ripples in a pond, far beyond their initial goals. What had started as a response to discrimination had become a movement for change. His phone buzzed again. Another investor calling. This time, he let it go to voicemail. Their story wasn't about becoming the biggest or richest. It was about changing the game, about opening doors that had been closed for too long. Looking at the wall of success stories one last time before heading home, he smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making sure others don't face the same barriers you did. 2 years can change everything. The entrepreneur stood in his office, now occupying the entire top floor of a downtown building, looking at the framed projection letter from First National Bank hanging on his wall. It served as a daily reminder of where this journey began. His company had just been valued at over $200 million. The number itself seemed almost unreal, but the impact they'd made was very real indeed. Their lending platform had transformed from a response to discrimination into a nationwide force for change. That morning, his assistant popped her head in. "There's someone here to see you," she said, trying to hide a smile. "From First National Bank." The entrepreneur straightened his tie, the same one he'd worn to that fateful loan meeting 2 years ago. "Send them in," he said, taking a deep breath. 3 people entered: the bank's CEO, their head of digital innovation, and surprisingly, the loan officer who had rejected him that day. The CEO stepped forward, hand extended. "Thank you for meeting with us," he said, his voice carefully measured. The loan officer couldn't quite meet his eyes, focusing instead on the stack of papers he carried. The entrepreneur noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "We'll get straight to the point," the CEO continued, settling into one of the office's comfortable chairs. "Banking is changing. Digital transformation is no longer optional, and frankly, we're falling behind. We've been watching your platform's success, and we'd like to discuss an acquisition." The entrepreneur listened as they laid out their proposal. They wanted to buy his platform, integrate it into their systems, modernize their entire lending operation. The number they quoted was impressive, far more than the $50,000 loan he'd once requested. "Would I retain control of the platform's decision-making algorithms?" he asked, thinking of all the small business owners who relied on their fair lending practices. The CEO shifted uncomfortably. "We'd want to adjust them to align with our traditional metrics." The entrepreneur stood and walked to his window. Below, he could see the busy street where food trucks lined up at lunchtime, many of them financed through his platform. Across the way, a new bookstore was having its grand opening, another success story from their lending program. 2 years ago, he said quietly, I walked into your bank with a solid business plan and perfect credit. I wasn't asking for a handout, just a fair chance. He turned to face them. Do you know what we did with that rejection? He pressed a button on his desk, and the wall of monitors behind him lit up with data. We funded over 1,000 small businesses that your bank rejected. Default rate, less than 2%. Average business growth, 40% in the first year. We didn't just build a lending platform. We proved that your entire risk assessment model was wrong. The loan officer was staring at the numbers, his face pale. The CEO leaned forward. That's exactly why we want to acquire you. We can admit when we've made a mistake. The entrepreneur smiled, but it wasn't unkind. This was never about proving you wrong. It was about proving others right. He gestured to the wall of success stories. Each of these represents someone who just needed a fair shot at their dreams. He picked up the acquisition proposal. Your offer is generous, but I have a counter-proposal. He pulled out a different folder. Instead of buying us, work with us. Let's create a partnership that helps other banks learn from what we've built. Not to maximize profits, but to change the system that told all these successful business owners they weren't worth the risk. The CEO looked surprised, then thoughtful. The head of digital innovation was already scanning the proposal with growing interest. But it was the loan officer who spoke next, his voice quiet but clear. I'd like to hear more about how your system evaluates applications. I think I have a lot to learn. The entrepreneur nodded, pressing another button to bring up their platform's interface on the monitors. That's exactly where we hoped this conversation would go. Because in the end, this was never about getting even. It was about making things better for everyone. The sun was setting over the city skyline as the entrepreneur stood on the stage of a packed community center. 5 years had passed since that first bank rejection, and now he was preparing to announce something that would change even more lives. When I started this journey, he began, looking out at the eager faces, I thought success would mean proving someone wrong. Instead, it became about proving so many people right. He gestured to the crowd, filled with business owners who had received funding through his platform. The presentation screen behind him lit up with images of successful businesses, restaurants, tech startups, craft shops, and delivery services. Each represented a dream that traditional banks had overlooked. Today, we're taking the next step, he announced. We're launching the Future Founders Foundation. The screen changed to show the foundation's logo. Every year, we'll provide education, mentorship, and funding to 1,000 entrepreneurs who just need someone to believe in them. The audience burst into applause, but he raised his hand for quiet. But that's not all. We're partnering with 50 community banks and credit unions across the country. They'll be using our platform, but more importantly, they'll be learning from our success stories. In the front row, he spotted his old mentor, now a key advisor to the foundation. Next to him sat the credit union president who had given them their first big break. Both were smiling proudly. Our platform has now processed over $500 million in loans, he continued. But the numbers aren't what matter most. What matters are the stories. He clicked to the next slide, showing a map dotted with lights. Each light represents a business we've helped fund. Each light represents jobs created, communities served, and dreams achieved. The map was glowing with thousands of points of light, spreading across the country like stars in the night sky. But we're not stopping here. Today, we're going global. The screen zoomed out to show a world map. We've already started working with partners in other countries, helping them build similar platforms. Because talent doesn't have a zip code, and good ideas don't have a color or accent. He paused, taking in the moment. In the audience, he could see some of their first successful applicants, now successful business owners themselves. Many had become mentors to newer entrepreneurs, creating a cycle of support and success. "Remember that bank that rejected me?" he asked, drawing knowing chuckles from the crowd. "They're now using our platform to train their loan officers. They're learning to see potential where they once saw only risk. And they're not alone. Hundreds of banks have changed their lending practices because we proved there was a better way." He clicked to the final slide, showing the foundation's mission statement. "Every dream deserves a fair chance." "But this foundation isn't about me," he said, his voice growing passionate. "It's about all of you and all those who will come after you. It's about making sure that talent and determination are what matter, not connections or appearances." As he looked out at the audience, he saw tears in some eyes, proud smiles on many faces. 5 years ago, I walked out of a bank feeling like my dreams had hit a wall. Today, we're not just breaking down walls, we're building bridges. The applause was thunderous, but it wasn't the applause that moved him most. It was the conversations he overheard afterward, as people mingled at the reception. Business owners exchanging cards, sharing advice, offering encouragement to those just starting out. Later that evening, as the cleaning crew was clearing the last chairs, he found himself alone on the stage. Looking out at the empty room, he could still feel the energy, the hope, the possibilities. His phone buzzed with a message. It was a photo from one of their first loan recipients, the grand opening of her third restaurant location. Below it was a simple message: "Thank you for believing in me." He smiled, thinking about all the future entrepreneurs who would never have to face the barriers he'd encountered. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making sure nobody else has to fight the same battles. Walking out into the night, he passed a young woman sitting on a bench, working intently on her laptop. She looked up briefly, then returned to what appeared to be a business plan. He smiled, knowing that whatever her dream was, there was now a system in place to give it a fair chance. The legacy wasn't just about money or success. It was about changing the story, about turning rejection into opportunity, about proving that when you give talent a fair chance, amazing things happen.